Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive or if you think like one and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Metcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve even more extraordinary results. Because no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. When Scott White created his business, PragmatIC Semiconductor, he didn't necessarily start it with a deep sense of mission. He started it because he saw a promising technology. In this episode, we understand the journey that he went on. The fact that he started, had a false start, realized the technology he'd chosen wouldn't work, and then he committed to building what was needed. And as he did that, he discovered that mission isn't always hardwired at the foundation of a business. It actually emerges often on the journey. And now we find out where he's got to, what the deep sense of purpose is, and how he's used purpose, in fact, as an opportunity filter to identify the most important areas for the business to pursue. This is a really fascinating conversation with Scott White of PragmatIC Semiconductor. Hi, Scott, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. Very good to be here.
So I'm interested in this. You are the CEO of PragmatIC, which is a really fascinating company working on deep tech, right? I mean, really breakthrough things. So before we jump into your sense of mission and purpose and what makes you tick and so forth, just tell me a little bit, what's the company all about?
Sure. So at PragmatIC, we make flexible semiconductor devices. So semiconductors is one of these interesting areas where probably a few years ago, people not in the tech area might never have heard of them. But it's obviously been in the news quite a lot recently because semiconductor devices are critical in just about every product we own today that has any kind of functionality. So everything from your car to your dishwasher to, of course, your laptop and your mobile phone and electronic devices you carry. So these are primarily in the form of silicon chips. They were invented about 50 years ago, and they basically form the brain of all electronic devices. And at PragmatIC, what we developed is a flexible non-silicon equivalent to that. So we make wafers of integrated circuits or chips, which look like this. And as you can see, they're extremely thin and flexible. That sheet or wafer.
Let me interrupt. Just for anyone just listening on the podcast, it just looks like a piece of, I don't know, cellophane, right? I mean, it's absolutely tiny.
Exactly. So it does essentially just look like a thin sheet of plastic, and actually most of what it is just the plastic substrate that holds it together. That sheet or wafer, as they're called in the industry, is comprised of anywhere from several hundred to several thousand individual chips. So they get chopped up into the individual chips, which then get applied into the product. But the big difference with our technology is that unique, extremely thin, flexible form factor compared to a rigid silicon chip, and the fact that we can make them for an order of magnitude lower cost. And what that means is we can put electronic intelligence into things that you wouldn't normally consider it being viable in. So this is not about replacing the silicon chip in your laptop and your mobile phone. It's more about how do you embed electronics into the things we interact with every day. So one of the
What kind of things would that be?
So one of the biggest examples is in packaging for fast-moving consumer goods. So if you think about everything you buy in the supermarket every day, it's in some sort of packaging because that's needed to ship it around the world and to protect the contents. That packaging, generally is fairly dumb. It doesn't do anything interesting, and of course, it ends up being waste at the end of the process. What companies are doing with our technology is embedding it in the packaging to create a unique identifier that can be tracked automatically through the entire product life cycle. That has huge benefits in terms of being able to manage the inventory as it goes through the distribution chain, reduce waste, improve efficiency, avoid anti-counterfeits, get proof of provenance, things like that. And actually most interestingly, the one we're seeing is that at the end of the life of that packaging, being able to ensure it gets recycled or indeed to enable reusable packaging models that provide a better sustainability for that kind of solution.
Right. So yes, this is fascinating stuff. You are taking technology into new areas because you can, having a flexible approach, a flexible product allows you to put it in places which traditionally layered products couldn't reach. So fascinating. How did you get in? I mean, to say this is like I guess it must have started off as a research project in some way. I mean, early stage. I mean, it's not a massive existing market that you just walked into and said, "We'll do that too." You created this. So, how did you get into the game? Into this game? Take us back to
sure. So probably best to just take it back to a bit of personal history. So I'm originally a mathematician, computer scientist. But I've never actually worked as an engineer. I spent several years at McKinsey, management consulting, eventually got bored with that because you never actually got to do anything. You just got to advise. But it was, obviously a great business experience, learning how to deal with and help improve the problems of, some of the biggest companies in the world. But, when I decided to leave there, what really excited me was how do you take interesting technologies and commercialize them? So very long journey there, but I joined a telecoms research center where I spun out my first company. And since then, prior to PragmatIC, I've built and sold 5 previous technology businesses. With PragmatIC, the way I got involved in this area was when I'd sold one of my previous businesses, I was recruited into a spin out from the University of Manchester that had some very interesting technology, as you said, kind of come out of the research environment. And it was a novel electronic device architecture that was particularly suited to being made in thin film materials. As it turns out, that particular technology didn't really have the right manufacturability and repeatability to scale. But what it did prompt was a set of very interesting discussions with potential customers around what they were looking for. And on the back of that, myself and Richard Price, CTO, formed PragmatIC with a view to develop the right technology platform to address that application. So this was 12 years ago, started essentially with a concept and a little bit of sort of core IP that we'd acquired out of that Manchester spin-out, but 99% of what we do is technology that we've developed in-house to address this specific objective of how you make thin, flexible, and extremely low-cost integrated circuits.
Got it. So this was a typical example of the journey not quite being what you expect. You start off with a technology that you think you can go with. You realize that's not going to get you where you want to be. But in the meantime, you've had conversations, you've seen there's a need, you've seen there is an opportunity, you can see there's value there that can be created, and that actually prompted you to say, well, let's roll up our sleeves and build the right thing for that need.
That's right. And in one sense, it kind of highlights the generic difference in approach that you tend to see between the UK and, say, the US. So in the UK, the most common thing is to find a technology that's been developed and spun out of academia that then you try and commercialize and find an application to drive into. In the US, the model is much more around starting with a business problem and figuring out how do you invent the right technology to solve it. That it's obviously not completely black and white like that, but there is a broad distinction there. And my first tech business I founded in Australia, but then we got funding in Silicon Valley. So sort of my formative learning around how you grow a technology business was all in Silicon Valley. And that really kind of led to a lot of the drivers first. How did we develop this with PragmatIC? Is that we had a technology that was kind of interesting. It would have been nice if that had fit, but actually the fact that the technology doesn't do what you need to isn't really a barrier to going and doing something interesting when you've identified a unique market opportunity that no one else is really addressing well.
Yeah, got it. So let's play with you a bit. This season is called Mission Driven CEOs. And what I've heard right now is a very, as it's the name of your company, it's very pragmatic, right? You spotted, you had come across technology, thought, I can make a quick buck on this one. Didn't quite work out, but you've done it. I'm joking a bit, but it obviously came through perhaps some random discussions. You encountered this technology, you thought, I could build a business on this. And now here we're on the show talking about mission.
Sure.
So what's the journey from that kind of entrepreneurial start to, where are you now in terms of why you do this, right? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yes, it's a very interesting question, and you mentioned also at the start, I think, the word deep tech, and I think that to me is sort of one of the interesting differences that has led to us becoming more mission driven. So my previous companies I would classify as technology companies, but not deep tech companies. And the way I distinguish the two is, with most technology companies, they are using technology to achieve a particular goal, but they aren't actually inventing new technology. Apple is a classic example. Absolutely fantastic company, but intentionally, they generally are not at the forefront of technology. They take existing technology, they package it into a product that is, better thought out and has a better ecosystem around it than many others, and that's why they're so successful. So there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just a very different beast from a deep tech business where your fundamental differentiation is you've invented a new technology. And so if I apply that to what we're doing at Pragmatic, we, as we just described, started with this business problem that we identified, that we had a number of customers we're talking to who said, we need the equivalent of silicon chip that is thin, flexible, and much lower cost. We set out to develop the technology to achieve that. And having done that, what we discovered was we had invented a fundamentally new approach to semiconductor manufacturing, and that had opportunities that were far broader than our original market objectives. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, as a management team, we went through a process of thinking through the range of different things we could do with the technology and with the business, and relating that to what actually drove us individually. What was our biggest motivation for why we came to work every day and worked the long hours trying to do this. And it wasn't actually about making money. Yes, everybody wants to make money at the end of the day, but the thing that actually motivates you on a daily basis often is something different. And for us, it was the fact that we're starting to see really exciting opportunities for our technology in areas that were not just marketing gimmicks or a widget that somebody could use, but things that could fundamentally change the way we interact with things in the world, and that could potentially address some of the biggest problems that as a society and as a global community we face. I mentioned earlier the opportunities for our technology in improving end of use outcomes for packaging and improving recycling reuse models. So that was one of the things that we were starting to see, that the way people were using our technology in consumer goods packaging was moving from marketing driven interactivity with consumers just to promote a brand towards something that was much more around actually how do we achieve all these great circular economy ambitions that brands have realized are essential in the longer term. Can we leverage the technology to create the right solutions that actually make that viable? So there's those kinds of applications. Healthcare was another big area we'd seen opportunities for our technology in, and it wasn't necessarily the early commercial drivers for use, because it tends to require somewhat more complicated solutions. Adoption cycle times are much longer in those kinds of industries than in something like consumer goods. But what we wanted to do was drive the company towards those kinds of applications where we're saying, actually, these are things that when we look back on this in 10 years time, not only do we want to have built a profitable multi-billion-dollar business, but we want to say, actually, we've improved people's lives by the way our technology is being used. So yeah, that was kind of a transition, I guess, for us. I don't think we would have described it at the time as becoming mission driven, but if we think about sort of what people mean by that now, that was essentially the process we went through, was how do we change this from being a company that's purely driven around developing interesting technology to address a specific market opportunity, to how do we take a much broader view on developing a technology platform in a way that has environmental and societal benefit.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it's always really fascinating when you start to ask people what really excites me about this business. Yeah, and there's there's like you said, there's always, well, hey, there's a nice financial opportunity here, and finance is the fuel. You need money to do all these things, but then when you get past that, you get into what are we really going to be proud to tell our grandchildren and all these kind of things. And yeah, I can imagine, you know, those things don't necessarily have the impact overnight, because you have that discussion and you walk out the meeting and things haven't yet changed, but the way you think about things starts to shift.
It starts to shift, and yeah, there's always a balancing act between, as you mentioned, that, you know, not just individually the drive to make money, but also as a company, you have to show a path to profitability in order for everything else you might want to achieve with the business to be successful. And it's interesting, I was reading over Christmas a book called Let My People Go Surfing, which is by Yves Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, the clothing brand. And, you know, the Patagonia is very much a mission-driven organization, very passionate about environmental and social issues. And, you know, never actually, you know, when they started the business, it was never intended to make money. It was just to basically, you know, pay their way so that they could go surfing when they wanted to, or go climbing. And so it's sort of interesting reading how that's developed. And he was drawing out this exact point we've been talking about, that the way you square the circle around having a profit-oriented company that also is addressing, you know, strong environmental and social agenda, is the profitability actually is the enabler to make that happen, you know, for the business to be around and succeed, and therefore, you know, longer term develop the aspiration it has to, you know, to make the world a better place. The starting point is it has to be a sustainable, profitable business in and of its own right. That works for the shareholders, it works for the employees, and, you know, everybody that's got stock options in the business. So, you know, everybody can financially make money out of that at the same time as driving towards this broader agenda. And I think a lot of the venture investment community have actually also had that realization in the last decade. You know, there were a few ESG oriented funds that started up, you know, probably 10 years or so ago, but it's now become pretty much, you know, mantra, you know, that everybody understands that actually you can actually tie these two things together. It's not that you have to be, you know, all pure and focused on social good and not make any money, but actually if you have businesses that are, you know, as a venture investor, you are investing in, that actually if they're driving towards a strong ESG agenda, that can actually enhance the returns of the venture investment as well.
So I guess the question I'd ask on that is, do you finding yourself in situations of conflict on that, right? So, because, yeah, definitely at its best, there is this self-reinforcing loop, right, between the profit and the purpose. Although some, you know, when you get down to brass tacks, sometimes there are questions to be made about, on this particular moment, do we optimize for the profit, or, you know, or do we take a slightly longer term view towards profit in service of the purpose? I'm just wondering, you know, what your thought on that is.
Yes, I wouldn't say there's conflict, but there is always a balancing act. And, you know, in my experience, most things in business are balancing different priorities. It doesn't mean that one excludes the other, but there's always prioritization, and, you know, and how you trade off different decisions at various times. So, you know, we have to, you know, because of where we are as a business, we're still in scale up mode. We're not yet profitable. That means, you know, the default situation is, you know, yes, you have to do the things that are going to drive the business towards being a profitable, sustainable business in order to do everything else. But the broader, longer term aspirations help focus, you know, which areas we look at, and also which we explicitly don't look at. And that's particularly relevant for a business like ours, where, because we have a very unique technology that has so many applications, we have way too many things that we could do with the technology than we could ever possibly manage in terms of the bandwidth of the business. So, you know, when we look at where do we focus our efforts, there is a threshold that, you know, they have to be opportunities that are going to be substantial scale opportunities that will generate significant revenue and be profitable for the business. But actually that still leaves, yeah, a huge scope of things to play in. And so within that broader range, we can focus the business around the ones where we think it's driving towards the things that excite us personally. And again, I sort of come back to that. One of the interesting things I've found is that when we'd first started this transition, I might have anticipated that the conflict that could arise there is a difference between our objectives as the management of the business versus our non-management shareholders who are just in it for financial return. And actually what we've seen is actually there's a very strong alignment there, because there is this recognition that actually if you're driving the business towards things that aren't just gimmicks and kind of ways of making money, but actually have a fundamental purpose and are creating fundamental good, then everybody is sort of recognizing now that generates better long-term returns. So our investors are equally excited by the same things we are. And so that doesn't actually create a conflict.
It's Richard here with just a quick interlude. If you're serious about multiplying your impact, I have a free resource that you won't want to miss. I've put together a short email course called Exponential Leadership Principles. In it, I set out how you can use the same strategies as some of the world's top leaders to get out of incremental progress and achieve breakthrough results. Be prepared to have your current thinking challenged and to learn some very new ways of leading. If you're interested in following along, simply sign up at xquadrant.com/go/exponential. And now back to the conversation. Yeah, so purpose is that filter for narrowing down the opportunities, really.
Yes.
Which I think is great, because then once you've done that, you're almost locked in by, like you've chosen the areas where you can make money and make an impact. And then that's great. So I know at some stage, as you said, you're still at an early stage in the business, you're still scaling up. If we were to go forward 5 to 10 years, what would you love to see? What's your kind of vision for the impact that the business creates, or what are you trying to build long term?
So within the next 5 years, or perhaps even if we more broadly extend that, we have a 10-year vision, and that's probably the best scope within which to put it. So within the next 10 years, we are intending to roll out at least 100 fabrication lines for our technology globally, producing at least 1 trillion circuits that enable everyday items to become smart and interact with people and with their environment. So that is sort of the, if you like, the kind of technical and tangible aspect of our vision. So how that then relates to purpose is, well, what do those smart items actually do? And so within that, what we have is a few core themes where we're focusing on things that, the real enablers of what are driving our business from a financial and profit perspective, but also from a purpose and ESG perspective. And I've kind of alluded to these before, but we have 3 specific kind of themes. We've had 2, and we sort of recently added one more. So one is circular economy and sustainability, and this is partially this was started by looking at the UN sustainability objectives and saying, well, which of these do we actually have real leverage to be able to impact? And so circular economy and sustainability, we have a very strong play in, both from an end user application perspective, as I described before. How do you ensure traceability of items throughout their entire life cycle, and particularly as they go towards end of life, and use that embedded technology and intelligence to be able to reduce waste and improve circularity within the economy. What we've also interestingly discovered is that all of the decisions we made from a technical perspective to move to these thin, flexible materials and allow a low-cost process also translate into having a manufacturing process that is dramatically lower environmental footprint than conventional silicon chip manufacturing. Right. So about 1,000 times lower carbon footprint. And so, what we have is this really nice combination that not only the end applications enabling a more sustainable world, but actually the way we're manufacturing the product also drives very clearly towards that sort of net zero and better environmental agenda. So that's one key theme. The second key theme is around healthcare, and the way we frame that is around ubiquitous access to healthcare. So we obviously have huge amounts of technology focused on how do we improve healthcare for people, but a lot of that ends up being very expensive. And so, then immediately leads to challenges around, well, how do you fund that? How do you make sure you have fair access to it? How do you make sure organizations like the NHS that are already stretched, it doesn't just add more cost into their budget, things like that. And so again, because of the inherent uniqueness of our technology and its low cost perspective, that has really interesting applications in how we apply it into medical environments to again, traceability of consumable items within that, and reducing waste and improving efficiency plays in, but also specific product opportunities like wearable smart patches that could detect atrial fibrillation or could monitor wound healing automatically to avoid sepsis and things like that. So there's a lot of conditions that our technology can be used because it can enable this thin, flexible, wearable form factor, and do that at a cost point that is dramatically lower. So this is moving towards things that you could go buy from your local chemist for $1, rather than have to go to your GP and have a $1,000 medication prescribed, or have to go into hospital and have huge amounts of expensive equipment to be able to do the same kind of diagnosis. So being able to push that and make it fair, make it accessible to developing economies around the world, not just to the well-developed economies. That's sort of the second piece of it. The third interesting piece that's sort of been added in the last year or two is around security in its sort of broader sense. So we've always known there are some applications for our technology in security, such as brand authentication and anti-counterfeit, but you can extend that also into national security. Think about some of the headlines people will have seen in the last few years around semiconductors and silicon chips being, critical supply chain issues for making everything from cars to, pretty much everything, we kind of want to go and buy that isn't just a consumable item. Any industrial product includes silicon chips today. And what's become apparent is that there's huge issues with the geopolitics behind that, and the concentration of supply, and the ability to manage supply and demand imbalance over time. And our technology has some really interesting characteristics, because the cost of a fabrication plant, a fab as they're called in our technology, is about 100 times lower than a silicon fab. Its physical footprint is over 100 times smaller. This means you can put these, wherever you need them to be. You can very much localize that manufacturing to allow, the technology to be directly integrated into supply chains, and that has huge implications for national security, for example. So those three themes are sort of the core themes that we're focusing on, that sort of cut across the technology development and the specific commercial opportunities. And so, if I come back to that 10-year vision of rolling out these 100 fabs, it's not just 100 random fabs producing 1 trillion items for gimmicks. This is about, we want those to be distributed around the world, pushing the manufacturing as close to our customers or to, the key national security objectives as we can, and addressing applications that are around improving security in its broader sense, improving circularity in the economy, and improving healthcare for the billions of people around the world. So that's kind of what I would ideally like to be able to look back in 10 years' time and say, yes, we've got this multi-billion-dollar profitable business that's doing this, making everybody lots of money, but actually the way it's impacting people's lives is actually the thing that is really transformational.
Yeah, Scott, that's fantastic, and I love the clarity with which you found these. I mean, these themes, they all make sense. You've explained them very articulately, and I think it's interesting. Where often there's many technology companies who, it can be sport for riches. We have this platform; it can be used for everybody, and yet actually getting that focus on those key themes.
And this has been a very much a journey for us. So I think as we've developed the technology and the business over the last 12 years, not only has a lot of that been focused on the technology development and the inventions and the translation into engineering and industrialization. But there's been a sort of parallel journey around understanding the scope of the use cases for the technology, how that can translate into what we're doing, and getting this clarity. So we definitely did not have that 12 years ago when we started the business, and actually even 3 or 4 years ago we had it as a sort of vague concept of, oh, we think we can do something that's really good with this, not just make money out of it. And it's only as we've matured the business and got it into proper manufacturing and scaled up the team that we've then sort of, in a sense, had the bandwidth to be able to sort of really properly crystallize this, properly focus our resource around it. So one of the fairly transformational things I think we did a couple of years ago was we hired a market development manager for circular economy. We said, okay, if this is an important theme, this isn't just about having a sales team that are going and selling applications in that area and developing interesting technology demonstrators that show how it can be used, but actually we need somebody whose entire role in the company is understanding this entire ecosystem and how we play into it in the various different ways.
I think your point around clarity is really important. Often people want, they search for, I want clarity and confidence to proceed, but actually those are in the rear view mirror. Normally you only get clarity once you've been progressing. You need commitment and courage to get going. That's more the point.
I think that's right. It's, there has been a rise of, what are, I guess, more now conventionally called mission-driven organization, where from the start there is a very, very clear mission. But I still think that's the exception rather than the rule. Mostly the mission sort of comes after the fact, when you say, you discover what can be done with it, and it's then having the ability to recognize that and to transform the organization is something that is focusing clearly on that, rather than it just being it can't just be a sort of greenwashing add-on that, ESG is important to people, so we've got to find a flag we can wave. It's got to be driven by something internal of actually, this is what we want to do as an organization.
So let's shift gears a bit with a couple of quick fire questions. What's the favorite quote that you live by or you bore your team with?
I don't know that I'd have a single favorite quote. I think we have, again, one thing I've never really done in previous companies is we've actually got a set of corporate values. And so we actually explicitly refer back to them. Pragmatism is one of them, not surprisingly given the name, but enthusiasm, aspiration, things like that. We have them on posters. So I've got one here on my desk. And actually what I've found interesting is it's surprisingly frequently how we actually can use that as a means of helping us make decisions in the right way. So we say, well, is this the pragmatic decision we can make here? Or, are we showing enough aspiration in what we're doing here? Right. So I'd say that's probably more than specific quotes. If I was to pick one quote, just because it's top of mind, that it's been important in some of the recent discussions, and my CFO kind of mentioned to the other day, is perfect is the enemy of good. And that, I think, it kind of reflects the pragmatism bit. This is not about trying to do the best thing for the sake of a purity of doing the best possible thing. It's about how do you do something that is fit for purpose for a given application and is good enough to do that. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to deliver the right functionality for what people want to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. What about a book? Do you have a favorite book that's influenced you or been important to you on your entrepreneurial journey?
Again, I don't think there's one that I'd say has been, kind of across everything. It changes as the focus of the business changes. So
what was the right book right now?
I mentioned most recently, Let My People Go Surfing. That is really relevant for some of the thinking we're doing at the moment of, as we mature as a business, how do we think even more about, the sort of environmental and social agenda of what we're trying to do. Probably earlier, it would have been the classic Crossing the Chasm and things like that, the sort of fundamentals. It hasn't gone out of date in terms of, the importance of some of the concepts in there. And, the way my brain works, it's not good at remembering detail, but it's very good at synthesizing concepts. So, often books I've read, I wouldn't be able to quote specific bits. I wouldn't be able to remember the detailed methodologies that Geoffrey Moore came up with. Okay, but still, there's that sort of fundamental understanding of actually, just because you've got some first customers doesn't mean you're in the mainstream. These are, I think, important things for any entrepreneur to understand.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. My mind's like that as well. My son is an expert at all the remembering details, and that's not my strength. Many of our best guests on the show, including yourself, come from referrals. So I'm always curious, who's somebody who inspires you? Who's an impactful CEO who you've come across that you might recommend as a great guest for a future episode? And what do you admire about them?
That's an interesting question. I'll probably have to get back to you with some suggestions. I don't tend to, for the want of a better term, go into kind of hero worship or idolization. Kind of everybody's got pros and cons. So I kind of very much like to look at across the scheme. And actually, the people that I really kind of am always interested in understanding is people like Steve Jobs, for example. These people that have been transformational in a business and a sector, and how do they actually do that? It's very hard to pin down specific business decisions or things like that. So to me, it's about the sort of understanding of how those people think about the world, so forth, that I'm kind of interested in. So sorry, that's a vague answer to your question.
No,
probably not as specific as it could be, but
that's fine. So Scott, we've talked quite a bit already about where you want to take the business, so I won't re-ask that question, but I will ask, as the business shifts and grows, what's going to be the stretch for you, right? So what are you going to need to do differently, reinvent yourself and your success formula in some way to be the leader that this business will need as it scales and multiplies over the next few years?
Yes, we've actually been putting quite a lot of thought into that internally, and not just around me, but around the company and the management team of sort of how does that evolve. And we have in the last 15 months or so doubled the size of the business, from 100 people to over 200 people. That trajectory is going to continue. So the way I've been thinking about this is a lot of what we need to do is transitioning from an organization where pretty much everybody knows everybody else. You can rely quite a lot on informal communication in terms of how things work. And you also have lots of people wearing multiple hats. So as CEO, historically, I've been as involved in the technical day-to-day, operation of the business and some of our technology development plans as I am in going out and securing funding and developing strategy for how we take the business forward. And so I think as we evolve, what we need is, just from a fundamental perspective, we need better processes and procedures in place. So we need to bring in people into the company who understand how to do that effectively. It's not necessarily something that is kind of in our DNA or in our experience. So most recently, I mentioned my CFO earlier. So we brought in a new group CFO, Rian Erding, who came from McLaren Automotive. He's been in the automotive industry for a couple of decades, I think. So he's got a really good understanding of to build a large scale multi-billion revenue manufacturing business. What are the kinds of things we need in place in processing systems? So there's an evolution of the overall team and the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle and expertise we need to make that work. In terms of how that impacts my own role, it's very much around how do I make sure the management team has evolved so that I'm not critical path in anything to do with the day-to-day operations of the business, and I can therefore actually spend my time on the things where I can create the most value in what I can do. And that's typically around things that are more strategic and long-term in nature. They may not have an immediate payback in the next 6 months. They're not actually about delivering to our first customers, but they're about how do we achieve that vision I laid out earlier? What are the things we need to do to make this business viable, to deploy hundreds of fabs globally? How do we work with governments around the world that are really interested in these topics at the moment? How do we work with our biggest customers to make sure that the way they adopt our technology is getting full leverage of it? And a lot of the topics we discussed before, how do we make sure that as we do that, we are increasingly developing our focus around the themes that we really want to drive the business around, not just the details of the technology and specific products.
Yeah, I think that's makes a lot of sense. You've got the business having to structure itself and bring a bit more discipline into that, probably, right? As you can scale, and then for yourself, it's very easy to see it all the time, right? Leaders find themselves doing things which are okay, they can do them, but it's not necessarily their genius zone where they can really create those outsized gains, right? It's almost
and I think I'd even put it more strongly than that. That not only is it, so I'd say a year ago there was stuff that I was doing operationally that probably was not the best use of my time, but we didn't have enough bandwidth in the team for me not to be doing that. I think if I look forward to where we're going, to me, success is always taking things beyond your own competence level. So we are growing the business past where I have experience in what I've done with previous companies. If we're going to make this in the next few years a multi-billion revenue, profitable business listed on a stock exchange at some point in the relatively near future, none of those are things that I've done. So, we need people who have experience in that. Otherwise, we're always going to be figuring that out as we go along, and the business is too important to take that risk. So it's not just that I should be using my time elsewhere, but actually we need to bring in people who are going to be better at that job than I could ever possibly be.
Great distinction.
Allowing me to focus on the things where I can really create the most value.
Yeah, great distinction. Well, Scott, this has been a great conversation. I've enjoyed really getting into the depths of deep tech, but then looking at what it creates and what it makes possible, and what the impact is. Obviously there's financial impact, and then there's this sense of how you want to change the world, and I love kind of hearing that with such clarity. So thank you for sharing that with us. If people want to get in touch or find out more about PragmatIC, where do they do that?
So starting points would be our website. It's pragmaticsemi.com. LinkedIn, we're increasingly becoming active on. I'm not so active just from a time perspective, but I'm trying to be more so. So those would probably be the two best starting points.
Perfect. Well, thanks for that. I'll put those into the show notes. And Scott, look forward to following you on this journey. It sounds like it's going to be an exciting one.
Well, thank you very much. Enjoyed the conversation.
Take care. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.